Guys, good morning. Welcome to the first of many weekends for a morning update with me. I am John Proctor. I am Johnny P135 around the industry on any fantasy site you find me on. And I'm just going to run through, I think, sort of the most common structure shells you're going to see this week. Some of my favorite GPP plays or GPP stacks or games to look at, as well as some of the injury news that has, as Pete Overset would say, flipped the slate on its head. So I think some of the most important injury news to start with, which is really the key injury that is changing the slate, is that Mark Andrews is not expected to play. Isaiah Likely will step into that spot. And as we've seen last year, he essentially plays that role almost one for one. It is one of the most important tight end roles in the league. And so when he steps into that role and plays it for 3K, would you play Mark Andrews for 3K? The answer is yes. So he will be the highest owned tight end on the slate. I don't think it will be close. I know people have questioned, should you play Likely or should you play Musgrave? I don't think it's even remotely close. I think Likely would probably project 20% better, something like that. And Musgrave is, he's an unknown in an unknown offense. He is, it's a divisional game, Soldier Field, etc. But I do think, Musgrave was probably going to be like 30% owned. Now he'll probably be 10. So he's got to consider in your tournaments. And then, Tyler Higbee, Njoku, Hurst, guys who were going to have some ownership before are all going to move farther down that ownership tree. So let's get into what I think is likely probably the most popular cash game build of the week. I think it's going to start. I'm not going to give, a full lineup that I think you're going to see, but I think it's going to start with Jalen Hurts, Jamal Williams, Raheem Mostert, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and one of those 3K wide receivers. I think the one you will see the most is probably Marvin Mims. And then I think people will also play Atwell, Reed, and maybe you might see some Kendrick Bourne. I wouldn't go there. But I think maybe you will see a little bit of that. So that's kind of where I think cash games are going to start. Maybe slightly different than that. You might see some Tyreek Hill over Jamar Chase, but I do think Chase will be maybe slightly more popular. That could change by later. It'll be one or the other. So, and that is for DraftKings. I think on FanDuel, you are going to see a very different, not very different, but a different structure in the sense that I think it will be Hurts or Richardson. I think Richardson may be more popular on FanDuel, but it will be one or the other. I think you are going to see probably Mostert there as well. And I think you're going to see Bijan as one of the most popular running backs on FanDuel. And I think you will likely see probably the most popular trio of wide receivers is going to be Ridley, Chase, and Sutton on FanDuel. I think that's probably how most people will build. Again, you might see Tyreek over Jamar Chase, especially because I think some people will play Joe Mixon there. He's a better price on FanDuel. Okay. So let's move into just sort of the structure of this slate, some tournament plays that I think. And I am mostly talking DraftKings. Seems like that is the most popular group of plays. Our group most popular for our group is DraftKings. I can probably spend more time on FanDuel in the Discord, but less and less contest offerings, unfortunately, over at FanDuel. So, some questions from last night that I got a few of that I think are interesting to go through is that people were asking about, and I think I get this question a lot at the start of every year. What are you playing in smaller field tournaments? And I think it's important to know that there isn't just a catch-all small field tournament. 100-man tournament and a 5,000-man tournament, they're both smaller fields, but you should be playing those completely different. It's much easier to get first place in a 100-man contest than it is to get first place in a 5,000-man contest. So, someone said, is it okay to play a cash game lineup in a 5,000-man contest? No. I mean, you are losing so much expected value by doing that. Is it okay to play your cash game team? Maybe your cash game team is slightly different than what you think the rest of the field is. Is it okay to play it in a 100-man? Absolutely. So just think of how big the field is, and then be cognizant of like how owned your players are going to be. So like a 5,000-man contest, I'm not playing anything close to a cash game team. I'm going to play a team that is correlated. I would probably hand build that team, but it's not going to be a cash game lineup because these days, cash game plays, I think Commanders defense will be one of the most popular, and they're going to be 30-40% owned in cash games and small field tournaments, maybe higher. So that's something to think about too. Okay. I know there was a discussion of what to do with sort of the other Ravens. I think J.K. Dobbins is a guy that everyone has kind of forgotten exists. He did miss the install of the offense, which is discouraging. But this is a Houston team that has had their run defense fall apart in recent years. So we could definitely see, maybe Houston doesn't show up at all. Baltimore is at home. They're almost a 10-point favorite. Dobbins sort of lines up to that kind of guy that you would want. Big home favorite, low owned, has a lot of talent, if he has that extra gear that he didn't have last year, he's a threat for big, long touchdowns, which is what you want on DraftKings, hoping for that 100-yard bonus since he's not going to catch many passes, I don't think. And then Zay Flowers and Odell Beckham. I think that's kind of your leverage off of Isaiah. I mean, like on lineups that you don't have Isaiah Likely, you want to play Lamar and Zay Flowers. I think that's really good leverage because if that game does go, if they win by 10, somebody's going to score. And if it's not Isaiah Likely, it's going to be somebody else. So I think that's good leverage off of that. Talk about Calvin Ridley. I think Calvin Ridley is getting more and more popular. He could end up being chalk on DraftKings by lock time as well. He projects really well for his price. And so he's a guy that it was like, you really like at that 10, 11, 12% ownership projection that you saw earlier in the week. Don't think we're going to get that low of ownership on him. So that's another spot I really like leverage. I think Richardson's going to be owned, right? Ridley's going to be owned. And what if Richardson's just horrible and the Jags never really have to like press? So then I really like playing ETN with the Jags defense. ETN is another guy that everyone has kind of like given up on over the summer. I think he started the summer as like a late third, early fourth round pick, and then sort of made his way into like fifth, sixth round because everyone has decided that Tank is just going to like take over or whatever. I think ETN is still the definite starter there. Especially if he's getting goal line carries that people didn't project him for, then you could see, Jags D pairing with ETN being huge. And then if Richardson stinks and Ridley doesn't have to do as much, that moves you ahead of a big portion of the field. So that's kind of, you just want to think through these things. Like, who am I gaining my leverage on when I play these guys? And, why am I doing it? So that's kind of how I think through some of these moves. And there was a mention of this, I think you hear talked about a lot, this Rams Seahawks game. I think Seattle has now moved to 5.5-point favorites. I don't think the Rams are any good. They weren't that good last year. I don't think they're going to be that good this year. Seattle, I think, is a better team than they were last year. And they get to start at home against a bad team. And so I think Seattle has a chance to really, put on a lot of points on a bad defense, a bad offense, bad team. Kenneth Walker is an interesting one. I think he will catch some ownership, but I'm not sure he will catch as much ownership as some of the ownership projections around the industry because people are really scared about Charbonnet. But if they're winning that whole game, I'm not sure Charbonnet plays all that much. Also think the Geno double stacks are in play for sure. And then, I guess if you could play a Geno double without a Ram, but I guess Tutu Atwell or Tyler Higbee are the guys that you sort of project to have, the most ownership there and that project the best. I think both of them are fine. And then a couple other guys I think that were discussed as to whether or not they are in play for cash games. Don't think Deion Jackson. I'm not playing in cash games. I think he's an interesting play though. Don't think, he had that game last year where he caught 9-10 passes. That's not going to happen with Anthony Richardson. I do think Rachaad White projects well. He's probably not a guy I would play in cash games, though. I don't think you need to go to him with Mostert and Williams, but he does project okay. Alexander Mattison, I think, is a guy who probably would have been massive chalk if we didn't have Jamal and Mostert. So I think he's a guy that I'll probably have a good bit of in tournaments for sure. Tampa Bay has always been sort of that funnel, and we're not really playing Madison to be efficient as a runner. We want him to catch passes and we want him to play at the goal line. And so I think he will, be the for sure lead back there. Another leverage guy, I think people are going to play Reed and they are going to play Musgrave. I think Aaron Jones is pretty interesting. He is healthy. It's the first game of the season. He's not at that point yet where he's, being limited, this and that. And I do think this is going to be sort of a slog game where you're going to see both teams running the ball a lot. So I do like that. Someone asked Mixon or Madison. I think Mixon projects slightly better. But I think it's pretty close. Okay. I know someone asked if someone said they see likely projected for about 15% ownership. It's going to be higher than that. He's going to be the highest owned, might be the highest owned player on the slate. And again, to reiterate, if you're not playing likely on a team, I think you should consider if likely fails, what happened, So maybe you play different Ravens. Maybe the Texans win. Maybe they keep it really slow and you play Dameon Pierce, something along those lines. You just want to think about something that happened that caused likely to fail and try and attack that idea. Just trying to see here. And I know people want to play a lot of the guys from this Packers-Bears game. There's better games. I think the Dolphins-Chargers game will be one of the most popular. I think the Denver Raiders game is better than the Bears-Packers game. I think the Titans-Saints game could be interesting. Those are two teams that have, over the past few years, been a bit of funnel defenses. So we may see a lot more passing than you expect. And that gives you big leverage off of Jamal Williams, who's going to be, highest owned player, second highest owned player on the slate. If maybe Derek Carr has a good game and, Olave and Thomas go off, or maybe it's Tannehill. Play Tannehill with one pass catcher and maybe one or two Saints. Game definitely has more potential than people give it. I think Minnesota Tampa Bay game is better than that game. I think the Jacksonville Indy game, Bengals Browns, Ravens Texans. So I'm just not going to play a bunch of players. They're cheap, but it's just not a good game. I think the game environment's bad, and you want to hit on when you're building tournament teams. You want to hit on a game that goes off. I want to have 4, maybe 5 players from that game, and if it goes, 62 points are scored, then multiple players from that game are going to hit. And if that Bears Packers game, maybe it's 41 points scored, something like that, then what, one player hits and you're picking between like 3 or 4 of these guys. I'm just not going to do it. Someone asked about triple ups, quintuple ups. I would not play a cash game lineup. I think it's good to have a lineup that's sort of close to your cash game lineup, but maybe has a little more correlation. Like maybe you play Hurts and Devonta Smith or something instead of some of these other guys, or maybe you play a different quarterback that pairs with one of those wide receivers, and then that type of lineup that you would use in your triple ups, your quintuple ups, maybe your 3-mans, 10-mans. Give yourself a chance to be in the top 20% of those contests. That's how I do it. Someone asked, are we leaning towards playing Metcalf or Lockett? If I'm playing Geno, I would likely be playing 2 of these guys, especially week 1 where Lockett is healthy, Metcalf is healthy. They're both like reasonably priced. And I don't know, that JSN is going to be, a 100% full-time player yet. I also think, it's always you're going in circles picking a tight end there, but they're cheap. Noah Fant's $3K, so you could consider him as well. But I would want 2 pass catchers with Geno. Unless you're in a smaller field, then playing one is fine for sure. Okay, let me see if I can give a game that I think I'm probably. So I think a game that people are not going to play much of, but they like individual pieces from, is that Cincy Cleveland game. We have seen in the past that Burrow has struggled against the Browns. So if you think that angle holds, I think Nick Chubb paired with the Browns defense is a really strong tournament pairing, especially because people are going to play a lot of Chase. They're going to play a lot of Mixon. And maybe the Browns, rattle Burrow. He also hasn't practiced a whole lot this offseason. Could go that angle. Or if you think this game shoots out, I think you're going to see a lot of Chase, but you're not going to see much of Higgins. You're not going to see much of Boyd. You're not going to see much of Amari Cooper. So those guys, paired with play, you can play Chase too, bringing in these other players from that game if that ends up being a good game. But I'm definitely going to have some Chubb and Browns D. Chubb is kind of another forgotten guy on this week. If he does get those third down looks, especially on a week where there's really they don't exactly have depth behind him that they were expecting to have earlier in the season. And then the Miami Chargers game, I think the one thing to remember with Eckler is he's that one running back that you can be okay with playing sort of as a pass catcher. I think Samaje Perine probably too. If you were playing Russell Wilson or Derek Carr, consider him a pass catcher, but not really an elite guy by any means. But Eckler, you could play Herbert, you can play Tua, and then if you're doing that stack, you can consider him as a receiver as well as a running back. And I think Mike Williams will be higher owned than Keenan Allen because of the discussion this offseason of him getting a more open route tree. He's going to play more positions, etc. So Keenan and Everett, I think, are the guys that are not going to be played as much. If you want the lower owned pairings with Herbert, and then obviously Tua doubles, week 1, I will have some Tua doubles for sure. While he is still healthy, everyone has sort of just forgotten about how good that offense was last year. And Raheem Mostert is going to be massive chalk. So the way that Raheem Mostert fails is Tua, throws 3 touchdowns to, Tyreek and Waddle. Do need to monitor Waddle though, since he is dinged. But that means he will be even lower owned. And then another wide receiver situation that we are monitoring would be in Carolina. I think Thielen's going to play. But if he would sit, Mingo would move way up. Hayden Hurst would move way up. But I would also really just downgrade that entire offense if he were to end up being out. But I do think he's going to play. I think that game's going to be pretty bad. And then the Commanders defense is going to be massive chalk one way. If you really want to play Commanders defense in a tournament, pair them with Brian Robinson. He is going to be the early down carry guy for sure. So he's the one you want to pair with Commanders D. I don't think he's going to have much ownership. So that's a way that you can, you want to play a small field tournament. You're like, I'm dead set. I'm playing Commanders D. Differentiate by pairing it with Brian Robinson. And then some other defenses, I think, to consider. I think the Jags, like I said, Jags defense, against Anthony Richardson is one that I'm surprised is not going to be as popular as they probably should be. And then I think you will see Raiders, Packers against 2 quarterbacks who have taken a lot of sacks. People will play the Texans against the Ravens. Lamar does have a tendency to make the occasional mistake. But I think it's a good week to sort of differentiate a defense. This is going to be one of the highest owned defensive spots we see in the early portion of the season. So going to other defenses is a really good way to differentiate yourself on opening weekend. And also, if there's any ideas that you have that you were dead set on, I don't know, Deshaun Watson was going to take the leap and be back to his old self this year. Ideas that other people have sort of decided is not going to happen. Stick to your guns week 1. People aren't always right. If there's something that you felt confident about a month ago and then you have sort of felt less confident right now, play some of that, that original confidence that you had. Consider doing that. Because this is the week where we think we know a lot, but we really don't. So I will be in Discord for the rest of the morning. I will be answering questions. And then I will be here every Sunday morning to answer your questions and run through what I think the chalk will be, what the injuries are that are important, and just sort of update you guys on the slate.